Elden Ring is a game that allows freedom of choice and many different playstyles. It deviates away from the linearity of previous titles and allows the player to do what they want to do when they want to do it. This game will take you on one of the grandest gaming adventures that you can find.
The great Elden Ring was shattered.
The combat in this game is phenomenal. The dodge roll feels weighted and snappy, and are weighted. So if your weight is light, then it will be a fast dodge roll, and if it's heavy, then it will be a slow dodge roll. There are a ton of different playstyles. You can be a mage and cast spells, with some of them being closer ranged melee spells, and others being long ranged. Some spells aren't even directly damage based, like you can cast a spell to make ice fog and slowly chill an enemy until they start taking ice damage. This mechanic really made me yearn for something like casting the ice fog and having it travel downwind and do stuff to opponents, but there's nothing like that in the game. Anywho, there's tons of variety in builds. You can be a swordsman and do melee sword damage, or wield a sword and inflict bleeding damage and be more condition and dot based. There's also archer builds which focus on using bows and arrows. Overall, the combat in this game is some of the best out there.
Hello? Is somebody there? Might I bend your ear for a moment, please?
So following up on the combat aspect of this game, there's also build theory crafting. There is a way you can play this game where you can find certain items throughout the world, such as armor pieces that may give you more intelligence, which is the magic stat for a mage build. So in the earlier half of the game I was a mage, but in the latter half of the game I was a strength/faith build. There's tons of spells you can collect for faith and intelligence builds. There's defensive spells to say cure poison off of your character, or offensive spells like casting a large magic beam on the enemy. Then for strength builds, there are Ashes of War, which can give your weapons the ability to do a special move. One common example of this is the Bloodhound Fang, which allows you to leap backwards after hitting your opponent. It's essentially an offensive and defensive move in one, so it's a popular weapon. I do wish, however, that a lot of the spells in the game had a more practical usage, but it's a minor complaint that I think perhaps I didn't test enough myself to get more mileage out of them. Which leads me into the next category. I put these two categories together because, well, I don't think there's that much of a coherent story to follow here. George R.R. Martin was a big name on the face of this game for the story, and I did a quick Google search and see that what he wrote was the backstory lore of the game, not the actual story of Elden Ring. He wrote about 5,000 years before the game takes place, and FromSoft took this story from there. I want to talk about the world building first though. The world building in this game is perhaps the best I've seen, and it really follows the approach of show with your actions rather than your words. The world building is super enhanced by the bosses and the environments. So for example, you fight Godric, a demigod and holder of one of the shards of the Elden Ring, and you actually navigate through a grand castle with tons of enemies guarding gates and such. Or another example, probably one of the peak moments I had in Elden Ring was Randy's questline. You have to beat Radon because Radon controls the stars, and without the stars in place, you can't access the eternal underground city of Necron. So after defeating him, you are taken to a mystical underground city just to get an item. Basically, the world building in this game is insane. Top notch. The story, however, isn't that easy to follow, and to understand it, you really just have to look at item descriptions and watch YouTube videos. The gist of the story is you are a tarnished on a grand quest line to get the Elden Ring and become the Elden Lord. Personally though, the lack of an easy to follow story wasn't a problem to me, as the side quests and gameplay mechanics are excellently done, and sometimes I prefer to play a game more than sit through tons of text dialogue and cutscenes. Another aspect of the story is the side characters, and I found the side characters in this game to be quite interesting, to be honest. Like, I can't quite put my finger on it, but the side quests I found to be enjoyable and mentally engaging for myself personally. I will say though, compared to something like Witcher 3, the side quests are shallow, and I also feel like they could have put something to keep track of your quests. I don't think it would hurt terribly to maybe put a marker on the map showing where you're supposed to go either. I found most of these side quests impossible to do without a guide of some sort.
Myself.
The level design in Elden Ring was quite an interesting topic before the game came out. I came from Bloodborne and Sekiro, which had phenomenal level design with tons of verticality and depth, but both of these games were linear type games that did level design phenomenally. So how would Elden Ring do an open world game? Well, it's like they made a huge open map with tons of verticality and depth. There are a ton of different environments, and certain areas in these environments are linear. Like, I think you could consider something like Godric's Castle a linear map design in an open world game. Then there are tons of areas in the open world that are just fun navigating through, and you will run into bosses that are seemingly guarding their territory. Moving on to boss design, it's just phenomenal. Like, everything in this game is just phenomenal. There are dragons, demigods, and kings. The design of them is top tier, and some bosses are built off their location. A crab will be on a beach, a king in a castle, and a fire giant as a guardian to a fiery cauldron. The soundtrack of this game is kinda insane, I think. Like, they have tons of fully orchestrated songs for what seems to me like they've done for hundreds of bosses. Some tracks are better than others, but I think there was clearly a tremendous effort put in here. There's music for every boss in the game. It goes from a lot of super epic music that will have you at the edge of your seat while fighting bosses, to just ambient music while you're exploring the general world. Overall, the soundtrack here is just phenomenally done, and I can tell a tremendous amount of thought and effort was put into it. The graphics in Elden Ring, I don't believe they are top of the line graphics necessarily. However, the environments are probably the best I've seen in any game. The lighting, atmosphere, and environments come together to create a breathtaking picture, and I was constantly in awe of the beauty of the world. It is a FromSoft game though, so I think the actual textures aren't top of the line, but the overall experience you get looking at the game when everything comes together is some of the best I've experienced. An example I can give based on my own experience is this. The graphics and textures in Red Dead Redemption 2 is better than Elden Ring, but the environment, map design, and lighting effects come together and create a much more mystical world to be explored compared to Red Dead. The expansion is absolutely fantastic. I think it adds around 40 hours of playtime, but perhaps a bit less if you are very good at the game. It offers a decent bit more playstyles and build crafting as well. The boss fights are fantastic and follow the themes of the areas very well. One example of the bosses being thematic is one area called the Abyssal Woods. To get to the Abyssal Woods, you have to go through a catacomb-like dungeon area. When you go to the entrance of the catacombs, it seems like the catacombs is all there is to it, but you end up deep underground in a ravine that holds an expansive forest with shadow creatures and a haunted mansion, and at the end of the mansion you fight Mydra, Lord of the Frenzied Flame. That and the specimen warehouse that is located in the Shadow Keep were top notch. I swear with the specimen warehouse they had me coming back to this same location 3 to 4 times, and each time would be from a different spot and open up to somewhere else in the map. The DLC is really like a mini Elden Ring. It plays out like it's entirely its own game in a sense. There is its own story, but once again the story is extremely vague without looking at item descriptions and watching YouTube videos. And there is a leveling mechanic in a sense. You can get Skadu tree fragments and upgrade your spirit summon levels. Skadu tree fragments will increase your player damage and tankiness, and the Spirit Summon buff will increase your Spirit Summon damage and tankiness. I believe you can get the Spirit Summon to level 10 and Erdtree Fragment to level 20. To get these buffs, they work kind of like collectibles that are scattered throughout the map. This enables you to fully explore around the map in order to be properly leveled for boss fights, or I could also see Erdtree level 20 making the bosses easy. I personally explored the map fairly fully and got my Erdtree Fragment level to 19, which allowed me to not struggle with the final boss of the DLC too much. Between the world building, level design, game mechanics, and many more, Elden Ring was a phenomenal game. I think it was a masterpiece, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time with the game in the 140 hours that I played it. Thank you for watching my video, and I'll see y'all next time.